Across the spiral arms of the known galaxy, there existed a shadow that no starlight could pierce. Entire civilizations whispered its name with trembling voices, though none dared speak it too loudly for fear it might draw attention. This force was not a fleeting marauder or an ambitious polity. It was an empire built upon terror, conquest, and the systematic annihilation of resistance. Their war fleets stretched across light years, their banners hung over the ruins of 1,000 worlds, and their doctrine was simple: obedience or extinction. Where their ships descended, silence soon followed, because they did not merely win wars, they erased the very capacity to rebel again. Every council race had felt the sting of their advance. Some had been enslaved outright, shackled and forced to serve in brutal campaigns. Others survived only by tribute, offering resources, technology, or even their young to ensure their own survival. Across centuries, this oppression calcified into a grim normalcy. In the great chambers of galactic politics, voices that once argued for freedom now whispered about appeasement. To resist was seen as foolishness, and those who dared were held up as warnings, their shattered planets serving as monuments to futility. Even those untouched by conquest adapted by lowering their eyes whenever the Empire's insignia appeared in the stars. The cruelty of this dominion was not chaotic but deliberate. Their leaders ruled through the meticulous cultivation of fear, employing methods that transcended mere violence. Occupied worlds were left partially intact so their neighbors might witness and despair. Surrendered populations were used as tools to enforce compliance on others, transformed into soldiers who killed not out of loyalty but because they knew the alternative was obliteration. It was a design so effective that entire generations grew believing resistance was impossible. The galaxy was vast, but in every corner the same truth prevailed: against them, there was no victory. Among scholars and strategists, debates flared quietly over how such power could be challenged. Fleets from multiple species combined had attempted to halt their rise, only to be dismantled in a single campaign. Technology failed to bridge the gap, as the Terror Empire adapted swiftly to new innovations. Economies collapsed when forced into endless arms races, and those who survived the aftermath were absorbed into the very war machine they had tried to oppose. This history weighed heavily on every diplomat and soldier who considered rebellion. The lesson repeated across centuries was brutally clear: defiance led only to ruin. In this long age of darkness, rumors still persisted of systems untouched, fringes of the galaxy too distant or insignificant for the conquerors to notice. Travelers spoke in hushed tones of colonies growing in obscurity, of peoples who had yet to kneel or pay tribute. Such whispers were dismissed as hope clung to by the desperate, a salve for species too beaten to accept their fate. Yet even the Empire, for all its vast reach, could not survey every star at once. It was inevitable that somewhere, far from their gaze, strength might be gathering unnoticed. For the majority of the galaxy, however, the only rational path was survival through submission. Parents taught their children not to dream of freedom but to endure, to find dignity in obedience where resistance could only bring death. Cultural traditions withered as tribute replaced heritage, and songs once sung to honor ancestors were now rewritten as odes of loyalty to foreign masters. The very idea of hope became a dangerous indulgence. Those who still carried it concealed it deep within, for fear that even a spark might draw the flame of annihilation. This was the order of existence when humanity's presence lingered far beyond the periphery, unknown to both oppressor and oppressed. The great powers of the Council scarcely registered the fledgling species, treating Earth and its colonies as little more than background noise in the grand cosmic ledger. No envoys approached, no warnings were offered, because what threat could an unremarkable people pose? Compared to the leviathans that ruled the stars, humans were irrelevant. The Empire itself had not yet bothered to acknowledge them, their attention fixed on richer targets and long-standing rivals. But history is not measured solely by the strong who dominate, but by those who decide to no longer accept inevitability. The stage was set for an upheaval unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed in countless generations. All it would take was for the Empire, complacent in its reign of terror, to turn its gaze toward an insignificant corner of space and assume that what had worked on 1,000 others would work again. The cruelty that had cowed billions would soon meet a people shaped by resilience, forged through hardship, and unwilling to bow. The balance of power that had seemed eternal was, though no one yet realized it, already beginning to fracture. The first contact was not marked by ceremony or diplomacy but by violence. A raiding flotilla of the Empire, driven by habit rather than strategy, stumbled into Terran space expecting to add another name to their endless list of conquered subjects. Their arrival mirrored the pattern repeated for centuries: sudden strikes on colonies, bombardments intended to break morale, and demands for unconditional submission. It was a script they had perfected through generations, one that had always succeeded. Yet what they found among humanity was not fear but defiance, not compliance, but a response unlike anything they had faced before. When the first human settlements came under attack, the expectation was surrender. Instead, within hours, organized countermeasures were launched. Defense forces responded not with scattered resistance but with coordinated tactics that displayed planning, foresight, and an unsettling calm. Orbital defense platforms tracked enemy vessels with precision, while ground-based command networks relayed data seamlessly across systems. To the Empire, this was bewildering. Species under their assault typically fractured under pressure, falling into chaos before formal resistance could even be mounted. Humanity's colonies, however, reacted as though they had anticipated this very scenario, as though survival against overwhelming force had been rehearsed. The initial skirmishes ended not with mass abduction or planetary ruin but with losses on the side of the aggressors. Several raiding ships were destroyed, and those captured provided the first testimony of a new opponent unlike the rest of the galaxy. They described adversaries who advanced with unnerving confidence, soldiers who executed maneuvers without hesitation, and commanders who seemed indifferent to their own survival so long as the mission succeeded. The stories spread quickly, carried back to the Empire's high command with tones of disbelief. These humans had not pleaded for mercy, nor had they crumbled under intimidation. They had fought with a ferocity that felt alien even to veteran conquerors. Among neighboring civilizations, the reports of this clash ignited cautious discussion. Many dismissed the accounts as exaggeration born of embarrassment. Surely the Terror Empire, undefeated across millennia, could not have been halted by a species so obscure it had scarcely been catalogued. To them, humanity was a minor anomaly, perhaps fortunate in its defenses, a temporary irritation soon to be corrected by the Empire's inevitable retaliation. But scattered voices in the Council raised concerns. The speed of the response, the discipline of the fighters, and the willingness to strike back all hinted at a mindset different from those who had long accepted submission. If even a fraction of the reports were accurate, a potential disruptor had emerged in a galaxy long locked in despair. The Empire, pride wounded, did not delay. Reinforcements were dispatched, larger vessels armed with heavier weapons. Once again, they expected to crush opposition swiftly. Yet humanity's approach escalated in tandem. Fleets mobilized not just to defend but to intercept, employing strategies that leverage every advantage of terrain, timing, and deception. When outnumbered, they did not retreat into silence but counterattacked with precision strikes designed to cripple logistics. When faced with overwhelming firepower, they targeted weak points with uncanny accuracy, forcing engagements on their own terms. Slowly, a disturbing realization began to creep into the minds of their enemies. These were not the reactions of a desperate species clinging to survival, but the calculated moves of a people who studied war as though it were a science. Alien prisoners of war carried the most chilling accounts back to their rulers. They spoke of human eyes that watched without fear, of commanders who treated battle as inevitability rather than catastrophe, and of soldiers who pressed forward even when wounded, refusing to yield ground until objectives were achieved. Some described a sensation difficult to articulate, as though they themselves were being hunted during the fight. This inversion of predator and prey unsettled even seasoned veterans of the Empire's campaigns. For the first time in living memory, their forces had not been the embodiment of fear, they had felt it themselves. Within the council chambers, debates grew sharper. Could this obscure species alter the balance? Should overtures be made, or should humanity be isolated before its defiance inspired others? The majority remained cautious, convinced the Empire's next wave would prove decisive. Still, unease spread. The galaxy had grown accustomed to inevitability, to the certainty that conquest was unstoppable. Now, that certainty showed cracks, and through those cracks, the image of humanity emerged, resilient, relentless, and disturbingly unafraid of the very doom that had subdued every other civilization. The Empire's commanders believed escalation would restore order. Entire fleets were mobilized, hardened veterans who had subjugated dozens of species dispatched with confidence that this time the defiance would be crushed utterly. Yet when they arrived, humanity unveiled something the galaxy had never seen before. From the black void emerged a vessel so immense and imposing that even the most jaded officers hesitated. It was not the largest construct ever built, but its design radiated purpose. Every contour spoke of function over vanity, a warship built not for intimidation through scale but for absolute efficiency in destruction. Its armor was layered with alloys designed to bend hostile energy, its silhouette jagged and uncompromising, bristling with weapon systems calibrated to strike with precision. The ship's presence alone unsettled enemy formations. It moved with deliberate intent, a leviathan that did not rush or posture, but advanced as if the outcome were already determined. The Empire had faced colossal battleships before, but none that carried such concentrated lethality within a single hull. Sensors registered firepower equivalent to entire flotillas, energy signatures spiking with each system activation. Behind the scenes, human engineers had followed a doctrine alien to the rest of the galaxy. When faced with an adversary of overwhelming numbers, answer not with quantity but with singular, unmatched quality. One vessel forged to embody annihilation, capable of standing against fleets by itself. The first engagement erased any doubt. The warship entered a contested system already occupied by a reinforced fleet. Standard procedure dictated the raiders would bombard colonies while reserves held the line. Instead, their sensors flared as beams of impossible intensity lanced across the void, carving through capital ships in single strikes. Missiles tracked not by simple guidance but by predictive algorithms tore through evasive maneuvers, detonating with surgical precision. Coordinated drone swarms deployed from concealed bays overwhelmed smaller craft, disabling them before their crews understood what they faced. Within hours, wreckage filled the orbital plane, and survivors transmitted panicked reports describing an enemy that fought not with desperation but with mastery. What struck hardest was the precision. The warship did not waste ammunition on displays of dominance. Every strike had purpose. Every maneuver was calculated to instill dread. Civilian infrastructure was spared, not out of mercy but because it was irrelevant to the mission. The message was unmistakable. This was not random retaliation or opportunistic defense. It was controlled eradication of hostile capacity. Those who escaped reported not only destruction but humiliation, as though the Empire's vaunted fleets had been dissected and discarded with clinical indifference. Whispers of this ship spread quickly. Council intelligence operatives pieced together fragments, circulating rumors of humanity's doctrine. Analysts noted that while other species constructed fleets as symbols of collective might, humans concentrated force into a single mobile citadel. Their philosophy was chilling in its clarity. If war could not be avoided, then design a weapon capable of ending war outright. To the oppressed races, this idea was intoxicating, a glimpse of resistance embodied in steel. To the Empire, it was an existential threat unlike any encountered before. As subsequent clashes unfolded, the dreadnought became more than a weapon, it became legend. The Empire dispatched larger and larger contingents, and still the outcome repeated. Systems that had been resigned to despair suddenly witnessed the unimaginable, their tormentors fleeing. For centuries, the pattern had been conquest followed by silence. Now silence came not from annihilation but from the wreckage of Empire fleets left drifting in ruin. The warship's name became unspoken prophecy among the enslaved. If it arrived, salvation followed. If it appeared in your skies, the old terror was already broken. The psychological toll reverberated far beyond the battlefield. The Empire's image, carefully cultivated as invincible, fractured. Commanders began to hesitate, troops whispered about facing a predator immune to fear. Their rulers issued proclamations of inevitable victory, yet in private chambers they demanded answers. How could one vessel undo centuries of dominance? What manner of people had built it, and what did that reveal about the humans themselves? Across the galaxy, perception shifted. Humanity was no longer an afterthought. It was not merely another species resisting conquest, but one that had produced a singular symbol of defiance that bent the trajectory of history. The dreadnought stood not only as a war machine but as proof that inevitability could be broken. The balance of terror that had defined existence for ages now had a challenger, and every system under oppression dared to imagine freedom in the shadow of a single human ship. Campaigns that once unfolded with predictable outcomes began unraveling in ways the Empire could neither explain nor prevent. The dreadnought was not deployed haphazardly. Every strike was planned to dismantle not just fleets but the infrastructure that supported them. Supply convoys vanished into debris fields, communication relays were silenced with precision strikes, and forward bases were reduced to molten ruin before reinforcements could respond. The Empire, long accustomed to dictating the pace of war, now found itself reacting, scrambling to cover weaknesses it had never considered vulnerable. Humanity's doctrine was clear: destroy the enemy's ability to wage war, and ensure no chance of recovery remained. Observers across the Council began recording the transformation with growing astonishment. Where once the terror fleets swept unchallenged across the stars, now rumors spread of catastrophic defeats at the hands of a single vessel. Systems that had endured centuries of subjugation suddenly saw opportunity. Slave uprisings flared as oppressed populations realized the Empire was no longer untouchable. The dreadnought's victories were not confined to physical destruction, they shattered the illusion of inevitability. Fear, once the Empire's greatest weapon, shifted its allegiance. Soldiers conscripted from conquered worlds deserted at alarming rates, unwilling to die for masters who could not guarantee survival. The dreadnought's crews understood the psychological dimension of war. Each battle was broadcast to maximum effect. Images of shattered armadas circulated through underground channels, reaching even the most isolated colonies. Survivors recounted the relentless efficiency of human tactics, reinforcing the belief that a predator now stalked the predator. This deliberate shaping of perception created a ripple far more powerful than any plasma beam. The galaxy, once resigned to despair, began to believe resistance was not only possible but inevitable under human leadership. For the Empire's strategists, the dreadnought became a puzzle without a solution. Standard fleet tactics failed, numerical superiority offered no guarantee. Attempts at ambush were countered by uncanny anticipation, as if humanity's commanders could see the battle unfold before it began. Experimental weapons were tested, but the warship's adaptive systems absorbed, deflected, or neutralized them. Each defeat compounded their desperation, leading to increasingly reckless offensives that only provided more victories for humanity. The more they struggled, the more their aura of invincibility eroded, until even their core supporters began to whisper doubts. Allies who had once tolerated the Empire out of necessity started hedging their loyalty. Tributary worlds withheld resources, minor factions quietly reached out to human envoys, and entire fleets defected at the first opportunity. The dreadnought did not fight alone. Its presence inspired cooperation among species long divided by fear. Humanity positioned itself as a rallying point, not through promises of dominion but by demonstrating capability unmatched by any other force. For oppressed peoples, this distinction mattered. Humanity did not demand submission, it offered deliverance. That subtle difference transformed the political landscape as effectively as any victory in the field. The Empire, sensing its authority slipping, attempted to reassert dominance with brutality. Entire systems were purged to set examples, populations eradicated in acts of rage. Yet these massacres no longer produced obedience, they only deepened hatred. Each atrocity amplified calls for rebellion, and in every uprising the shadow of the human warship loomed. The dreadnought did not need to be present to influence events. Its reputation alone became a weapon that reshaped decisions across the galaxy. In council records, analysts began describing human warfare in unfamiliar terms. They noted that humans did not simply win battles, they removed the possibility of continued resistance. Their campaigns dismantled logistics, fractured morale, and destroyed faith in leadership. The dreadnought was not viewed as a ship but as an inexorable force, a phenomenon that redefined what war meant. Where once the Empire had symbolized inevitability, humanity now embodied it, and the shift was irreversible. By the time the dreadnought carved through its 10th sector, the galaxy no longer doubted what it represented. The Empire, for the first time in living memory, was losing. Not to another great power, not to a coalition of equals, but to a single warship crewed by a species that had emerged from obscurity to overturn the established order. The tide had not just turned, it had revealed that the ocean itself belonged to new hands. The Empire's collapse did not come gradually but as an avalanche. Decades of unquestioned dominance had concealed internal weaknesses that only became visible when their fleets were shattered one after another. The dreadnought's relentless advance exposed the hollow foundation of their reign. Worlds once cowed into obedience no longer feared reprisals, and entire sectors erupted in rebellion. Garrisons that had stood for centuries were abandoned or annihilated, their defenders unwilling to sacrifice themselves against an enemy that could not be stopped. By the time the warship reached the Empire's heartland, resistance was already fracturing from within. The final campaign was not a contest of equals. Fleet after fleet assembled in desperate defense, yet they dissolved under the same precise, unrelenting strikes that had destroyed every force before them. Defense stations crumbled, carrier groups disintegrated, and even their most elite squadrons could not delay the inevitable. The dreadnought's path cut directly toward the capital system, and each engagement only reinforced the image of inevitability. By the time it breached the core defenses, the Empire's leadership was paralyzed, issuing contradictory orders and searching for non-existent escape routes. Their strength, once their defining feature, had become meaningless in the face of human determination. The capital's fall was swift. Citadels that had loomed as symbols of terror were reduced to ruins within days. Palaces, once filled with rulers who believed themselves untouchable, echoed with silence. No treaties were offered, no negotiations entertained. Humanity did not seek accommodation, it sought conclusion. The same ruthlessness that had been perfected in defense of their colonies was now applied at the Empire's core. Every command structure was dismantled, every arsenal dismantled or destroyed, leaving no possibility of resurgence. The power that had enslaved countless species was extinguished in a blaze of methodical destruction. Galactic observers anticipated the next step with dread. They assumed humanity, having defeated the great oppressors, would replace them. Such was the cycle of history, one conqueror falling only to be succeeded by another. Yet what followed defied every precedent. Humanity did not raise banners over conquered worlds or demand tribute from liberated peoples. Instead, its decree was startlingly simple: never again would one empire dominate the galaxy through fear. Systems were freed to govern themselves, slave chains were broken, and council chambers once muted by terror now filled with voices long silenced. The dreadnought, rather than anchoring dominion, became a watchful sentinel ensuring no new tyranny rose to replace the old. This restraint unsettled many as much as the victories had. The power to dominate absolutely was in humanity's grasp, yet it declined the crown. Instead of conquest, it enforced order through deterrence, ensuring balance by the mere threat of its return to the battlefield. The message carried across every star system: humanity did not fight for territory, but to ensure freedom. This philosophy, alien to those who had only known cycles of oppression, redefined galactic politics overnight. A balance of fear was replaced by a balance of accountability, with the dreadnought as the unblinking reminder of consequence. For civilizations long crushed under tyranny, this was liberation they had scarcely dared to dream of. Former slaves spoke of their first unshackled generations, rulers once trembling under tribute rediscovered sovereignty, and cultures thought extinct began to rebuild. The dreadnought's shadow lingered, not as oppression but as assurance. Even those skeptical of human motives acknowledged the undeniable truth: no empire would risk rising again while that ship remained in orbit, and no power could match the force that had dismantled centuries of domination. In records preserved across the Council, the fall of the Empire was marked not only as the end of an era but the beginning of a new one. Historians would debate the motives, politicians would analyze the strategies, and philosophers would ponder the implications. Yet the common people, those who had endured generations of fear, remembered only this: the force that had terrorized the galaxy was undone when humanity chose to fight. A single warship had carried an entire species' resolve into the void and rewritten destiny. In the centuries that followed, the story became legend. Children on liberated worlds grew up not fearing the return of their oppressors but telling tales of the humans who had stood when no one else would. The refrain echoed across cultures, carved into monuments and whispered in songs. They terrorized the galaxy, until humanity sent one warship. After that, nothing was the same, and no one would ever forget.